but you'll be in conversation anyway throughout.
And here we are. Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Wesley Enoch. Welcome to this conversation at CIAF, where we're talking about cook. Yes, you know, it's not just the thing in a pot. It's somehow someone who came and claimed this country 250 years ago for the British Empire. Now, did he actually succeed? Let's find out some more about it. We've got an amazing group of speakers today. And firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge all of the sovereign nations that we have around the table and around the nation here joining us. I'm here on Gadigal country, Eora country here in the Sydney area. And just to acknowledge too that the elders that have always shown us the way, amazing kind of and also the young people who are our future, how they all work together to acknowledge our amazing contribution to our nation, to keeping us together, and of course our sovereignty. And we'll ask each of the speakers in a second to talk a little bit about where they come from. But just to set a little bit of the scene, as I was suggesting, it's 250 years since James Cook, Lieutenant James Cook at the time, his journey through to Tahiti and then through the Pacific to come up the east coast of this continent here. And of course, he was looking at the transit of Venus as a sense of the scientific expedition. But unbeknownst to many people on that ship, in 1768, when they disembarked, Cook got some secret orders, which was to look at if they find a continent, that he should chart its coasts, obtain information about its people, and cultivate their friendship and alliance, and then annex any convenient trading routes in the king's name. Then Cook came through and said, okay, there's actually no one here. I'm going to claim it all, which was all we know. We were there, right there, looking at it all. And he writes in his journal, in the name of His Majesty, taken possession of several places upon this coast. I just have to apologize in advance if I do freeze up. My internet is a little bit unstable. Sydney is a backward place to be sometimes. But just to say that there are several places upon this coast I now once more hoisted English colours, and in the name of His Majesty King George III, took possession of the whole eastern coast, and by the name New South Wales, together with all the bays, harbours, rivers and islands situate upon this coast, after which we fired 3 volleys of small arms, which I assume were cannons, which were answered by the like from the number from the ship. Back and forward, and by putting a flag up, he thought he owned the place. Now, I don't know about you, seems a bit odd to me. I'm joined by an amazing panel that, and in fact, we might have Alberta join us in time. But we've got David Jones, who is an artist, and we'll get to talk to him a little bit more. I'm just seeing Alberta Hornsby coming, which is great that she'll be. And Murrumu Walubara, who is, in fact, he gave me the title, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade. And we'll talk a little bit more about the sovereign nation of the Fiji and what that means for us here. But first, I just want to ask each of you, just to give us a little sense of what you think it would have looked like what do you think if you were on the shore, what would that have felt like? David, I might start with you.
Well, there was a Yawa written by some people from the Yawa Dumas from Jinnabara, I believe, that's recorded his passing up the east coast. And so they described how he, disappeared into the mists of Thorvald, but they followed him all up the coast. And obviously it was a very interesting thing to see. It was, like a pretty amazing event, these large, I forget originally thought of these boats, but I'd imagine it would have been one of spectacle. Yes. And interest,
Uncle Milton, you're on Thursday Island as we speak to you. I know David's there in that Brisbane area on the Maiwa. Uncle Milton, what do you think it would have looked like, these ships, and what do you think the people who, in the day 250 years ago, how they would have seen this amazing sight coming at them?
I'm here.
Oh, hello, Roberta. Welcome. I'll come to you in 1 second. Well,
Yeah.
back to you, Uncle.
So you have you got me on now?
Yeah, we can hear you. I'm just thinking,
Okay.
Uncle, what do you think the locals 250 years ago, what did they see? What did you think they saw with these ships coming through?
Well, our language would be Markai. Markai meaning, spirit, a spirit form, spirit figure. Of course, before Captain Cook, there were other activities, Dutchman and Spaniard and all the sort of activities that took place here. So our people knew that, these were Markai, were spirits. They come, their spirit form, spirit ship. This is why we sort of, the ancestors back then inherited that the name for them, spirit ship. This is why one of the canoes were named after the spirit ship, the tall ship. Sure, it would be like fascinating, like interesting to see, a white fella for the first time. So you'll be wondering always, like our people would be observing, why are they here? These are spirits. Why did they come? So are they telling us something? Is there something that we need to know? So these are the sort of things that would have went through the ancestors, mindset and all that sort of thing. But yeah.
It'd be interesting. Murrumu, as the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade, it would have been interesting then to see.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and may God's peace be upon you, for His only begotten Son, to all the people out there today, Wesley and all the family who are speaking through this medium. But I guess you're right. Anything that wasn't Yidinji is foreign to Yidinji, and I would say quite safely that Cook wasn't the first one. There are recounts of stories here and of possibly Egyptians and many other different visitors in the Yidinji narrative. So I'm not an expert in that. However, I have listened and heard those stories, and perhaps it would be good to hear that as part of a different session. But the Yidinji nation is 100% Yidinji. It is not a British, and it's certainly not Australian. So I have heard other people's accounts, especially the Corex account and other people's account along the way, but it would have been quite strange. And maybe today's equivalent would be maybe rocking up in a spaceship or something similar, a modern vessel of some sort, and very alien indeed.
Alberta, hopefully you can hear us here now. We're just talking about what it would have felt like years ago for our ancestors to see these ships coming through and what it may have meant to you. I mean, do you have stories of that and connections to that?
Wesley, when we started looking, talking about Captain Cook and his visit to the Endeavour River, we, under the guidance of my uncle, the late Eric Giral, he talked about a story from the Dreamtime, and which spoke of our ancestors who came from the west in the form of Kalkarunkal, a Wallaroo, and Milkandur, the Mars plover. And during their time here, they spent, I suppose, making law or whatever happened in the time of the dreaming. And when the spirit died, or when the Wawu died, their spirits travel to the east, and our ancestors always had a story that talked of them returning back, to this country, but they believed that when these people came back, when their ancestors returned back, their skin would be white, and that they would come with a hand of plenty. Now, we started talking about this, discussing this when we first looked into the journals, and I couldn't find any, after Uncle Eric passed away, I couldn't find any other references to this story, nor could any of the elders tell me of their knowledge about this story. But I did look in a book that was written by one of the pastors at Hopevale Mission when it was a mission. It's called Kangaroo, and in one of the on one of the pages, it related this story by I think it was the Reverend Furl. And he was saying, oh, you can't tell these people anything because they know everything. And they know, they told him about Gulpurunkel, of their ancestors returning, coming back with the hand of plenty and with white skin. And I can imagine when listening to some of the older people talking about the missionary days, my grandfather and some older men, they said, we already knew about Jesus before the missionary came. And I can imagine them at people being shown the picture of Jesus, with pale skin and being talked about as coming with the hand of plenty. So it sort of resonated. It made sense to me that because even Roth commented that even during the gold rush, people were wondering why these white people who were coming to their country did not recognize them as their relatives.
I think that we've heard a similar story for a lot of the kind of the European connection, and Murrumu, just this notion of, you were saying too, that it wasn't the first.
Well, that's right. So
that they've been
I think it's very important that there were intertribal alliances, treaties and agreements for trade, marriage, many different things. But in terms of visitors from Asia, or what people would describe as Europe, for example, I know that there are accounts up further north about Israelites or people that describe themselves as such visiting the Straits, or what is described as the Straits in Australia. So there are many stories, and I think this is a really important thing that is being talked about today. Cook, it appears, it continues to bring a lot of pain to a lot of the Aboriginal men and women I talk to, and all the different tribal nations. And so it's a very interesting beginning of something that is still here today, and the Yidinji Nation is trying to help remedy that. And I think by doing what we've done is part of that story.
Well, I might come back and talk about this, especially ideas of sovereignty and treaty and sovereign nations and how that was working. But I might go to David. David, this anniversary, what does it mean for you, this 250th anniversary of you've made a series of art pieces about it, but also written a thesis. What does it mean for you?
The 200th anniversary of Cook's Landing, sort of. Yeah. It's just same old, I guess. Like in our language, it was Mathari. He was, they were the spirits and such. yeah, I'm sorry. It's just, it was Philip founded the nation, but Cook, found Australia, as it were. And, so every year, there's this reenactment of, of invasion and robbery. And I suppose that's really what it comes down for me. And that's why we did for an exhibition a little while ago. It's just 250 butterflies. And that was the symbol of freedom for my grandmother. And so we did 250 black butterflies pinned up against the wall to describe them as not having any freedom to be.
Mm.
And so it's just it's another an anniversary of everything that went wrong.
And David, I showed a little bit a piece of your art there. I'll show it again in a second. But talk us through what inspired you to make these pieces of art that you can actually see at the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair.
I wanted to look at the denial that is still in Australia of the murderous foundation of Australia. I mean, and I wanted. My sister's a psychologist, so they use the vicious cycle of anxiety. So what I wanted to do was just sub in denial for anxiety, and look at the Australian nation as a sort of like a subject. And so I wrote and sort of described Australia's sort of endless sort of situation of acting without thinking or reflecting on their actions. And so this eternal sort of pushing across the landscape that they make. The Australia is what they make. It's Australians live in Australia and Indigenous people live here. But so that picture there is just the cavalcade of continuous shoving this old horse glory, this old concept across a landscape, that sort of thing anyway.
Mm. And just before we move on, there's another image that I'd like to share, the one with Cook and the sexton.
Yeah, well, that's the last page of the book. It was sort of an introduction to the exhibition and the thesis. So it was called the Australian Cookbook, 6 Easy to Follow Steps for Inventing a Nation. And the idea is that it starts with him I just wanted to use Cook because Cook is that screen memory. He's that thing, the monument that is put in front of everything that was terrible, everything that was done to us. So it's always this idea that, there's a gentleman scholar and peaceful settlement, rather than what actually sort of happened. And so Cook, MacArthur, all these statues, Philip, all of them are there to actually sort of hide or, and to re-establish the goodness of the white Australian settler, so that they can feel sort of okay about themselves and having all this, built up and inherited profit from the alienation of the land from us ourselves, like how they stole it.
Mm. We're going to talk a little bit more about this notion of sovereignty, but I want to pick up this idea of monuments. I know those who are in the Cairns area, it's no surprise to you. You know about this 10-meter high Captain Cook who's doing this kind of hands out kind of image over the skyline. It's a pretty disastrous kind of looking image. It was first built in 1972. There's been lots of different commentary about that, but also there's been commentary about other statues and why make statues to this particular man, and because there is a kind of political storytelling happening there. Uncle Milton Savage there, I might ask you, what's your position on the idea of creating statues and monuments to people like James Cook?
It's a good sort of question. Well, according to us, Indigenous culture, we draw pictures, on rockways, in clay paintings and all that sort of thing. We draw a picture of a man. But this form of a statue sort of scenario, of course, it comes from the Western sort of civilization. But to us here, we do not sort of support the idea of a statue. I can just give you, if I can go back to, there was a monument of Frank Jardine on Somerset. The local mob on mainland actually went and did a protest, which they pulled down the monument of a ruthless murderer, according to Indigenous history. So you can sort of understand that why Indigenous people are not recognizing the statues, because statues sort of remind you of that intergenerational trauma. So I'm not a statue person, but for, I could put a statue of my mother, on her grave to remember us, what a wonderful person she was. I mean, that'll be what's name for myself. But for a statue of an historic, horrific event, I don't support it.
Alberta, I'm going to come to you. This notion of monuments and statues, the idea of legacy. You've been thinking about this a lot too, about what's the right way to remember, especially in the Cooktown area that you're in.
Well, I mean, Cooktown, the very name of our town is, all about Cook. Now, I don't have an opinion about monuments. Monuments could be looked at as, it could be used as a form of education to tell the good or the bad, and to get people to think about, because a picture paints 1,000 words. Here in Cooktown, we have a monument to Captain Cook. I don't mind it being there because the seagulls can go and sit on his shoulders, but we know from the journals the legacies that he left, and he did leave a legacy for us mob here in the Endeavour River, because through his journals, I don't speak on behalf of all the Kupi Mithadwana people from here. We're only a small group, and we work with the Cooktown reenactment, and we look at the legacy of what was written in his journals 250 years ago. And, the word list that he wrote, that was written by Sydney Parkinson and, collaborated with Banks and Cook. One of the first words that they wrote down was the word bummer. Now, to me, I thought, bummer, my goodness, that's who we are. That's who we call ourselves, bummer. And here, Cook, it was written down in the journals. Now, how many academics or how many of us have had a chance to see what was written in those journals? It told me a lot about, explained cultural governance, the Bummer cultural governance that was applied to this country here. And we could apply it, we can understand it in cultural terms because we still know that culture today. And so that was the legacy that he left for us. As for statues, I really don't care about statues because a statue can tell you a good story, or you can apply the bad story to it. I mean, if there was somebody bad, so you can tell that is that man who did bad things in our region.
Yes,
so,
and it's often men's stories too. Lots of men going up in statues everywhere. Agreed.
Well, that's right. I mean, we have statues in Cooktown of many things, and yeah, sometimes it makes you angry. but sometimes you use it. You can tell your story as part of your truth telling.
Yes, indeed. I mean, there was the Courier Mail just 3 days ago, I think. They were actually asking the readers of the Courier Mail to say, should we rename some of these places like Cooktown, but also Townsville, Gladstone, Mackay? And they talked about Quandamooka country, where I come from. They're talking about Russell Island, which was named after Lord Russell, who voted against the slavery, against the abolition of slavery, that he wanted slavery. And so should we actually call these places by the names of these people? Murrumu, I'm going to come to you. This notion of who gets to name things and what gives them the right, and how should we remember these people like Cook in this way? Should statues, should naming, should they happen? And what are we doing about that now?
Well, it's a good question. I'm with Auntie Alberta in that I don't really place any importance on statues or things like that. It's just the same as a building. And what I can say is that whether it's a statue, a building, an airport, or a hospital, it's attached to the land. And the land here is the city of Geemoy, which is the original title of this area that Australians would describe as Cairns. So without a treaty or formal agreement, then the Cook statue and everything on it is the property of the Yidinji nation. And it's very important to comprehend that situation. The Federal Court of Australia says that Yidinji is a pre-1770 society. They were here before Cook and they're still here today. So this is the Australian evidence. And, I think that it's very important that those same determinations, it says that Yidinji owned the land pursuant to their law. So under Yidinji law, we created the Yidinji government. So neither the Australian courts or the Australian parliaments created the government that we're talking about today, but we want to protect the Commonwealth of Australia. We want to protect Queensland. We want to protect the Queen of Australia with the sovereignty and the law that is on this land. And that's what this is all about. It's that Auntie hit it on the head. It's how you see things. I would teach my son that if he walked into a room and there was blood everywhere and there was a knife on the floor, I wouldn't touch the knife and remove it from the scene because it's evidence. Same way with statues and monuments and all these other things. It does tell a story. And we have to remember there are people who live on our territories that have a connection to England and to Europe and all these other places. And, as a Yidinji nation, I'm talking about now, we're very happy to look after them. So there's no element of bad faith there with that. But in terms of people placing too much importance on statues, that's their choice. However, I think the real issue is actually the matter of sovereignty, and that Cook broke his orders. He wasn't a fantastic officer. He did a lot of travel, and congratulations to him. And the irony is we wouldn't be here talking to each other if it wasn't for Cook. So in this context now. So what do we do now? We can look back, but how about we settle the past and secure the future for everyone on our territories?
I mean, I don't think you can talk about Cook unless we start talking about sovereignty, and I think that's the big discussion that we're about to enter into. Just for those people who are tuning in, it's great to have you here. I know that there's a number of people watching through Facebook Live. If you've got any questions, just put them into your feed, and then it'll come through to us, and I can ask the panelists some of the questions you might have as well. So, David, I'm just going to ask you this question about why aren't there more statues which show the First Nations experience? Why don't we see more statues alongside, like Uncle and Auntie Alberta? They're just saying that which show the First Nations experience. Why isn't that happening, do you think?
Because it's counterproductive to the colonial program. So there's no point in advertising the wrong thing. Well, that's about it. I mean,
is there such a thing as a non-political statue?
It's very hard to say that anything's non-political, isn't it? I mean, everything sort of does, swim in history and culture, and our current understanding of who we are.
Mm.
You know, what
I
we
think
are.
Uncle Milton was saying something similar. This notion of going, you know, it tells the story. It gives a sense of a marker of what the story would be as well. You're an artist. You believe in making marks, making objects, making artistic outcomes. Do you think that we as First Nations artists should be spending more time putting out there images and narratives that strengthen us?
Yeah, because it's a cultural, it's a modified cultural practice. You know, and it gives us. I mean, personally, my father was in courts for 20 odd years before he passed away, and since I sort of, I'm not really good at the speaking and the litigation and such. I mean, art actually gives me this. An avenue, a way of expressing my, disappointment. But but also, the more important, I guess, is the ways to move forward. So, unfortunately, my art usually sort of relies on a dark humour, to sort of try and get people, caught into the painting itself, and then hopefully when they look at the etching or the image or so the art becomes a sort of an aesthetic machine that sort of can on their way out, if the viewer then starts to reflect on what they've found in the art, then maybe there's something to sort of take forward. So art is, I don't know, I think art is fairly important like that. Maybe it's always been important for making understanding and keeping records and relevant understandings alive, in a continued way.
We've just got something coming through the Facebook feed saying that the Cook statue has also a role to play in tourism and things like that as well, especially the one there in Cairns. But maybe that the Cook statue in Cairns could be turned into a pirate and renamed the Captain Jack Sparrow statue. I think that's a little bit naughty there. That's from Loretta Sullivan. And Auntie Rosie Ware was saying, yes, let's put up more of our statues around our places to tell our stories, this notion of what that means. I'm going to move us into this conversation. We're already there. We're already talking about sovereignty. And there's Murrumu, you're living it. We're all living sovereignty, but you're actually structuring it all around. But you've sent through this image of you in a car, which I was looking at it going, oh, actually, I look a little closer and it's saying something else on the number plates. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what sovereignty means for you, and maybe in relation to this particular picture?
The Unity government was created about 7 years ago. It was. It's often reported in the press that I've created the Unity government and the Unity nation, which is incorrect. I wasn't born thousands of years ago. So I think it's very important that there is a whole group of what I describe as a royal society. And if you can imagine that the elders are in their own right something similar to the House of Lords, if we're using a Westminster parallel, they have instructed the House of Commons, which is the Sovereign Unity Government, which is this thing here. It's an office that I hold. It identifies Murrumu Walubara as the Foreign Affairs Minister. We are living it in that a majority of people are, but it's very important that the tribal societies consider setting up their own governments to protect the Commonwealth of Australia and all its juridical persons. So the state of Queensland, for example, the Queensland courts, the Queensland Police Service, and everything that's created within the Commonwealth of Australia. The problem that we've had in the past, which is still current today, is that the Commonwealth of Australia is a derivative of British sovereignty. And British sovereignty left here in 1986. The money changed. God Save the Queen wasn't sung anymore. Advance Australia Fair was introduced. And the world was starting to decolonise in the 70s and into the 80s. And when you look back at the history, in 1941, for example, the Prime Minister at the time, John Curtin, said that the Commonwealth of Australia was established in the South Seas as an outpost of the British race. So this is a white Australia policy that still exists today, which is why I, as a man, cannot hold an Australian identity or use it correctly in law. And so we said, okay, let's try and fix that. Let's try and go down this track and create a Yidinji government where there's two different entities that can actually unify through a formal agreement. And the Yidinji nation has its own stamps, it has its own seals, its shield, its flag. This is a letter to Prince Harry there, and his officer replied straight away. So you can say that you own the land, but until you start acting through it and acting through pieces of paper in government, then that's what's really going to help the Commonwealth of Australia. Because it's very important to understand that Australia is a foundation member of the UN. It's also a member of the Commonwealth of Nations. So by protecting the Commonwealth of Australia, we protect all those families that it's attached to also at international law level. And that's why those men appear, or the images of the subject matter, like Scott Morrison, Nigel Scullion and Ken Wyatt, the reason people ask you, why did you put them on your stamps? I said, because they've agreed to uphold Yidinji law. We can't ask for more than that. And this is part of the Great Australian series. So there are things happening all the time with our office, with other international actors, not only with the Commonwealth, but we've taken it upon ourselves, as instructed by the Yidinji elders, to go forth peacefully and to really offer that universal peace and perpetual amity to all the foreign nations. The Yidinji way is to be a friend to all and an enemy to none. So that's why we support the Commonwealth of Australia and Scott Morrison. I've met him once before, and I would say that he would be a decent bloke. And who knows, he might be the one that would help come to the table with the Yidinji offer. Now, everyone here that's listening to it, the Guga Yimithir, the Kaureg, and any other tribal nations here, the Quandamuka and all these, they can go back to their law and create this office. Remember, Cook came here as an officer. When he said there was no office, there's no other office here, maybe he was saying there's no paper administration here to deal with. So when we create this office, now we've got pieces of one office to another to treaty. And that sounds crazy, but I think there's a really important role here for the tribal societies to play. And dare I say it, we can make Australia a superpower.
Well, if we accept that we are the oldest living culture on the planet, we are already elders in that international sphere, that we should and could act like that. That's really fascinating. Uncle Milton, coming to you, this idea of the illegal immigrants that you sometimes talk about, that what that meant when those first boat people were arriving, this notion of sovereignty, how, well, it was never ceded, but what's your relationship to the British and what they've been able to do in the last 250 years?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, I gotta give acknowledgement to Mighty Creator, Jehovah God, and His Son Jesus Christ, who give me the strength to actually speak. Because when you look at the past years, we were mute. We didn't have a right. We didn't have a voice. We didn't have anything to speak about the way we were being treated. So when I mentioned about the elders standing back, observing, why are they here? What are they doing? What is their purpose? So they're observing for people like myself to understand why they were here. So just going back to, because I can say a lot of things about the history of how this region was established, the past injustice, you name it. I can say a lot of things that will make sense to all of us to understand. To understand the present time, you must understand the past, what has happened in the past, in order for us to go forward in the future. So it is very important that we do acknowledge these things. Yes, history is the most important thing. And going back to the sovereignty, when we talk about the statutes, I can say to the rest of the world, we have a place that was established by ancient people. The place we call Code. Code is a man-made structure. It is built in a way that it governs this region between Australia and PNG. So we had a system in place already. So why it hasn't been recognized? Because we speak different language. So the English language today is like we're going back through biblical days. Why the people have built the Tower of Babel and why Jehovah God destroyed the Tower of Babel. It's like we're going through the same process again to learn to speak English, but this time in a more different context to understand. So when we talk about sovereignty, we, Kaurareg, were here. We were our own sovereign nation of people. Under our own court system, our own governance system that govern us and PNG in this region. So this is going back in time memorial. Now, seeing Captain Cook, no disrespect to him, is a very important person too, to other race. But seeing him coming here and claiming British sovereignty on our island, Bedanag, it's not Possession Island, it's Bedanag. How can he claim British sovereignty when there were people all along the hilltops of the island and foreshores of the island looking at him? As you can see, we had our ship as well. Our ship are built from a dugout tree, from a tree to a dugout canoe. And this is the transport that we had between Australia and Papua New Guinea. So as you can see now on the screen, this canoe is named after the spirit ship, the tall ship. It is called Kei Marina. It is belonged to Chief Manu of Muralag. So these people, like we Kaurareg people, we have feathers on our head. We carry bow and arrow because of the interaction between Papua New Guinea. And so where was that table put on the beach? Let's talk treaty. Let's welcome you to our country. That never happened. That never took place. So really, Captain Cook did not set foot on Bedanag to claim Bedanag to what it is today. When you look at the monument, it's been built on the cliff of the island, so which is a false history. So if we need to correct this, we need to talk straight. We need to talk the truth. So it's in an educational way. It's in the best purpose for education. But sometimes, yeah.
Oh, and that's
Sorry.
totally no, don't apologize. I think it's that just Loretta Sullivan's writing and saying she's really enjoying the wisdom of people participating in this event. She's feeling the wisdom there. Thank you, Uncle Milton. And just going to Auntie Alberta there. This idea of treaty, Auntie, this idea of the laws, this how things will work, how reconciliation, I mean, what that really means, I don't quite understand in this current context. But what do you think treaty is, and how do you think we might need to start enacting it?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you, Auntie. Yeah.
Look, I don't really understand what sovereignty, treaty, or reconciliation really means either. But, you know, I often think about these things. In terms of sovereignty, look, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly.
Oh, it's just that my screen's going all silly.
Okay.
one of the things I can't really speak on sovereignty because I don't really understand the concept of sovereignty. If it is about taking ownership of your land, well, I already know where my land is, and I'm already attached to it. I don't have to own it. Owning something is a foreign concept to me. It is it's not a foreign concept. It was something that wasn't important to me. But belonging, knowing where you belong to, where your bloodline comes from, that's very important. And I don't think any amount of paperwork or any government legislation could ever change that. Reconciliation. Look, here in Cooktown, we take, we read Cook's journal, which talks about a reconciliation after a skirmish over turtles between that was initiated by a Gulkiyamathadwara elder. He was a Wambudwara elder from this country here in Cooktown, and Captain Cook. Now, the Wambudwara elder, after reading the descriptions by Banks and by Parkinson and also by Cook, the protocols the rituals that he performed, and the carrying of a spear with the tip broken off, he came forward and he spoke to Cook, and Cook couldn't understand what he was saying, but he recognised what was being said. So he handed the spears back to him. After that, reading that account, it came all down to the cultural governance of the Wambudwara elder, the responsibility he had for his country. This land here at Cooktown was a place where no blood was to be spilt. And this, through this skirmish, there was the potential for bloodshed. And the Gulkiyamathadwara men, or the men who were here, they behaved, they upheld their law. And even though they would have been angry and frustrated, they upheld the law. So to me, that goes back to maybe that is sovereignty. That Wambudwara elder, he had a responsibility to his country, and he did what was needed to do in order to keep peace on his own country. And I think that is a good concept of reconciliation to look upon. And I always say to my friends, Aboriginal people have been always carrying a broken spear, even when they were, right from the very beginning. From what even, going back through my childhood and looking at my grandparents and seeing what they all went through and knowing their history, they've always carried a broken spear. So Aboriginal people have been carrying the spear for a long time in order to be part of this country, to be part of its governance, and to be part of building their country, whether we live in a rural town or in a community.
Yes, yes.
And, in Cooktown, we have, through our discussions and through our involvement with council and interactions in the community, we are Bamangay, our Bama are being taken notice of. The Cook Shire Council, we've got a water park on the Esplanade, which was named after a Wambud elder who was the last initiated man, or Wambud man, who became one of the very first Christian men that went into Cape Bedford. So our park is called the William Duckworth Park. And and the council is and others are really helping to encourage and draw in our Bama from in the community to work towards a united and better community, an inclusive community. And I think, if that is what reconciliation is all about, well, I think that's great.
Yes, and I'm hearing in what you're saying there, Auntie Alberta, this notion of you have to stay strong in your own sense of law too, so you have something to reconcile with. That what hearing from all our speakers talking about the sense of knowing your own law, and that I remember talking to a constitutional expert saying that in fact there might be actual problems, validity problems with the Australian Constitution, because it doesn't have treaty, it doesn't have the contact with the land, it doesn't sit on the land, because it was never negotiated well enough. And I think that this notion of, because of Cook's actions, by neglecting the conversation with people here, that he actually set up the problems that we're all having now in terms of our recognition. We're coming to the end very soon. I'll come back to our speakers in a second, but Marion Healy is saying, how do we encourage people of leadership positions, mayors, state members or schools, to engage and sit down with First Nations people and talk about the feelings of unfairness, that white Australia gets to put their acknowledgement of achievement on display? How do the First Nations people show and tell their story so that all visitors learn and pay respects about their history, past, present, and the future? So some big ideas there. Just as we're coming to the end, we've only got a couple of minutes. David, I'm coming to you. Just your final words here. The idea of Captain Cook, Lieutenant Cook, is he in fact the father of modern Australia, or is he in fact the mother of all our misery?
I'd probably go with the latter. But and I think as you were saying earlier, old Joseph Banks is supposed to be the old dad, is the father. I think he was given that name. But I just sort of like the idea too that we express and enforce our own sovereignty, as different people. But it's the problem of we need to be recognised instead of being ratified by outside forces like courts and such, who then decide whether we're culturally appropriate or not, or whether we're even Indigenous or not. So all of you here for the idea of expressing your belonging, if we don't have to use the English word sovereignty.
Yes. Murrumu, coming to you, was Cook in fact just an innocent bystander, or was he in fact willful in the way that he ignored the proper rules, which was to acknowledge local people?
Well, once again, we can talk about Cook. My question would be, how would people living and talking on this through this medium now, and people listening to on Facebook, how do they want to be seen? What world do they want to build for the future? Because we can talk about Cook and everything else, but at the end of the day, the past has to be settled, and it can't be done unless the tribes actually are the ones to offer the treaty. In my view, this is a very real thing. If in most native title determinations, the court judge will say, "I come here today to give you nothing. Nemo dat non quod habet." If they come there to tell you that we can't give you anything, it means they don't have anything to give. It's with the tribes. The tribes, and Yeshua HaMashiach is the one who says this perfectly. I have come here to not destroy the law, but to fulfill the law. So we didn't come here to destroy it. We come in here to say, look, you guys can come and share this space with us, but because you're operating through this political and legal mechanism, now we have an office here on the Yidinji territory. You can actually come and have your constitution sit in our place here to conduct your business, subject to the terms and conditions of each of the tribes on their territories. So I think there's a really good opportunity here for that. And the Commonwealth of Australia it's sort of already enabled that mechanism by signing UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which they agreed to say, yep, Indigenous people can set up the governments. So have to think about that. and the opportunity is there, maybe put the Australian shirt off, like your rugby shirt off, put your tribal shirt back on, make your office, and then talk to this one.
Yes.
And that's where we people can consider that and have a look at what we've done here.
Well, it empowers yourself too. Uncle Milton, coming to you, should our past actually dictate our future?
Yeah, I will say this. I will speak my language. My mother taught me this language. Why are we here today? Mura zapul, tonartida ising zapul. What am I umaig? Jeta tonartida ising zapul. Things happen for a reason. So coming up cook has give us this understanding. There will come this time that we will voice our opinion. Is telling the truth. So that's what this language means. Things happen at the right time, right place, for the right reason. It's not about separating or segregating anybody. It's about learning and understanding. So when you look at the past, yes, you do need the past, because the past set the present straight in order for the future to be brighter. That's all it is. It's all part of tonartidizing Zapo.
Absolutely.
That's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Beautiful. Auntie Alberta, last word from you here. Just this idea of living on country and this idea of having history in a particular place. Do you think that that history should be changed in any way?
Look, the history has already taken place. It's already taken place. We need to, and we need to recognise that history, whether it's good or bad. We also have our cultural history that we're still learning as well. But, you know, we have to, look, I'm tired of being told to move forward and to forget about the past. But you can't forget about the past. But you can remember the past with that could motivate you on to do better. You can remember the past and say, well, I don't want this to happen again. This is what I'm going to do better. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, look, I think all the wisdom in this particular Zoom room is full on, and I'm very intimidated by it, because there is such wisdom, this notion of, and also a sense of, if not forgiveness, then the idea that we're here to work together, to go into the future together, without bitterness, without guilt, how we can move forward. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to our panelists of experts here, David Jones, Alberta Hornsby, Milton Savage, and Murrumu Walubara. Just say a big thank you to all of you. For those who are tuning in, just remember that CIAF, the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair, is on. It's online. It's on now. Get in there. And make sure that you know, things are selling very fast too. So get in there if you want to support some artists, to support some communities. We're back here for CIAF Conversations on Friday to talk a little bit about fashion and how the fashion industry and Indigenous culture is working together. So please join me in thanking our wonderful speakers. Thank you for joining us, and we'll make sure we'll catch up again on Friday. Thanks again. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.